we go. Okay. And then I guess it's time to start. Good morning, everyone. This is config split 2.x and the future of CMI2. Oh, now I turned on the camera again. Sorry. Yeah, thank you all for coming. And I'm hoping that you will learn something today and you will take away some new, and you will be as excited as I am about the new version of config split. I am Fabian Bircher. I'm a senior software engineer at Nuvole. You can find me on Twitter, even though I'm not super active there anymore. But Nuvole Web is the Nuvole Twitter account, and I'm Bircher on Drupal.org. And Nuvole is a distributed team across Europe, and our clients are mostly international organizations and institutions. And my colleagues at Nuvole were pioneers with configuration management already in Drupal 6 and Drupal 7. And this config split module came out of like this tradition, so to say, a couple of years ago. This presentation is meant to serve as a documentation. I made a similar presentation in 2017 at DrupalCon Vienna that kind of explained how configuration management with config split works. Most of the basic things from that presentation are still valid, but there are a lot of new things to explore, and a couple of things have changed. So whatever I say now is more accurate than what was true in 2017, of course. The key components is how configuration is split, and how the configuration that is going to be split is selected. There are two different things. Like one is the first one, how it is chosen. The UI looks very much the same, but in the background it changes a bit. And then how it is split. Then there are some improved concepts for workflows, so you can do some of the things more easily. There's an improved UI, and finally, since this is also like the future of CMI2, the roadmap for core inclusion for some of these features. But we will see at the end of the presentation about this. So what is config split? Like a very basic introduction that if you have used config split, you should sort of be familiar with, but I think it's still good to understand more or less this concept. So since Drupal 8.8, there is the configuration transformation API that makes it so that modules like config split can interact with the import and export of configuration. And so when you preview the export in Drush, or you preview the import with Drush or the Drupal UI, then you see the difference, like on export, you see the difference between this export storage and the sync storage. And on import, you see the preview between the import storage, like the preview for import, and the active storage. And config split splits some of the config in this transformation. So the preview on the export will not have the things that are split off, whereas the import will have them. So when you import, you see what is going to be imported, and if the split is active, then the configuration will be merged in together, and you will see how it's going to be imported. So that's a very basic concept. I hope people understand this. I will try to use a sort of similar graphic style for some of the other examples. So what is new in 2.x? The first difference that is like fundamentally different, so to say, is that modules are split off as they had been uninstalled, and configuration that you mark as completely split is split as if it had been deleted. That means when usually when you do that, when you uninstall a module or when you delete a configuration, then other configuration might change as a result of it. You may be familiar with this. When you go on the uninstall screen and you uninstall a module, it will tell you these and these entities will be updated, and that is because the configuration or the module that you have may create dependencies. So some configuration may depend on your module, and in config split 1.x, it would just split all of the tree. So all of the things that depend on the stuff you split gets also split. But in 2.x, it tries to be a bit smarter, and it tries to change the configuration so that it doesn't depend on the things you split anymore. We are using the core services to do this, the same that change the configuration when you delete something or you uninstall a module. I hope this is understandable. The blocks here represent configuration. The green block is a configuration that depends on the thing you split, and the pink bar at the top is what makes it depend on the thing you split, and the blue one is split completely. So on the config export, the blue one will be gone, and on the config export, the green one will have the purple stripe removed. And I try to make the purple stripe config transparent to show it's only this stripe. Of course, it adds and removes stuff, and it keeps both. It's kind of like this config patch that I blogged about a while ago. And that's like the fundamental concept. And for this concept, we need this config patch thing to keep track of what changes when the split is made. So when the export happens, so that when you import it again, of course you want to have this stripe added back, right? Like the idea is when you export the configuration and you do nothing and you just import it again, there shouldn't be any change. So when you import the same configuration that you just exported, it should remain the same. So the second part, since we now have this patch, the idea was what else can we do with it? And in config split 1.x, there's the conditional split configuration. I know some people were a bit confused with it, but it allows for more flexible configuration management, and it keeps like a copy in the sync storage, but it splits off what the new one is. So in 1.x, you could imagine in the split side, instead of the box being transparent, it would be also blue. So, but now since we have this patch mechanism, we can just split off only the difference. You see the yellow one is not part of any split, and it is changed, and so you see the difference between the bottom row and the middle row. You see the yellow is still yellow, but if you compare the bottom blue and the middle blue, they're the same, because the partial split makes the export look the same as the sync storage. And whatever is different between the active one and the sync storage gets saved as a patch in the split. So far, so good, right? I'm going very fast through this presentation, so I hope at the end we will have some time for questions and answers. But this is like a interesting part of the update of config split. So this is allows new workflows to happen also. So then the next exciting thing that you didn't know you needed it, maybe. Or some people knew that they needed it, but they didn't know that they needed it this way. Or maybe I'm just wrong and I imagined this could be useful. But you will see this is important for later. So you know the normal configuration entities. They can have a status. They can be active or inactive. With config split, this is very important because you can have a split but not be active. And it means when we import the configuration, the split configuration is not imported and also not exported. So it doesn't participate in this magic splitting when it's not active. However, like you want to have this split activeness different in different environments, and therefore you usually override this in settings.php. So in the UI, it will even give you the string that you need to put in settings.php to override it. But in config split 2.x, there's also a new method on how you can override it. And this is with the status override with the state. So the state is kept in the database and is not imported and exported. State is the place where the last cron run is kept and many other things. State is like a key value store, and we save also now in this key value store which splits are overwritten and which ones are not. So the status override has non-active or inactive. So basically, you can use this feature or not. Like it's a normal configuration override. Drupal has this complicated configuration override system that most people don't care about, and they just use settings.php. Settings.php is part of this configuration override. But so are languages. And now also the split override with the state is also part of this configuration override. But that means that if you use this feature and you also use settings.php, whatever you override in settings.php will take precedence. The settings.php override is like the strongest one and beats all the other ones and is the value that you have. But for editing settings.php, you need to be able to edit the files and you need to like go away from the UI. Of course, there is also a trash command for this. Config split status override. You give it the name of the split and whatever you want to do. So on or off or none. And if you just give it the name, it will just tell you the status override status, so to say. Okay, maybe too much status here. Anyway, I hope this will be a useful feature. We will come back to this in the CMI2 update part because it's important for that too. Then another very important aspect that kind of comes with this or together or kind of shows how this status override is important is that you can now activate and deactivate splits. In config split 1.x, you just have the split either active or inactive in the form, and you could have it in settings.php overwritten or not. And the idea is that you set it up and you forget about it. So you set up your split, and then it works, and you just keep it the way it is, and it splits some of the configuration away, and that's good. And config split 2.x is also meant to work that way. So usually, and in my experience, you just set up the split once, and then it will export and import the configuration depending on your settings.php, and you set them up once for the different environments, and then you're good. But a lot of people have trouble getting there. So to create a split and then activate it or deactivate it. So, or I mean, usually when you create it, you create it in the active state, but it allows for different kinds of workflows. And In 1.x, how you would do that is you export the configuration, you change the override in settings.php, and then you import the configuration again. Like you export the whole configuration and you import the whole configuration. And then because the settings override, or actually you also have to clear the cache in between. So you change the override in settings.php, you clear the cache, then you import the configuration again. And in 2.x, it's a one step. You drush config split activate and drush config split deactivate. You give it the name. But actually, the drush commands are currently, they work, but they're a little less configurable, let's say, than the UI, because we also now have a UI. It's heavily inspired by the config import UI of Drupal core. You will see a screenshot in the next slide. And it is in a way related to the importing and exporting of individual splits, but it's a different thing. So maybe I can explain on the next slide where you see this UI. It's a bit small, I understand. The point is, it looks the same as the config import UI, and that's basically what it does. So when you activate or deactivate the configuration, basically you import the configuration, but the split transformation happens. So when you deactivate it, it will split off the configuration that is to be split off and import just the rest. And there is a little checkbox that you can also export the split at the same time. There is also a dedicated export tab that also looks the same, where it just exports the configuration to its storage. Then there is also a little checkbox on the deactivation, where it says deactivate this locally only. And this means it will set this state override from the form. So when you deactivate it, it will not actually change the split to be inactive. It will remain active, but it will have the state override set to inactive. And then the next config import and export will not use this split anymore. And since here you will import all the site configuration without the configuration that is split off, your site will be in the state of not having the configuration that is split. The activate works the other way around. Of course, it merges in the config that is in the split storage, and you have like a little checkbox to activate it locally only, in case the split is inactive. If the split is overwritten to be inactive when you import it, then it will just remove this override. The import of a split is very similar to the activation of the split. The import of the split is for when the split is already active and you just want to update the configuration that's only in the split directory. So it's like you would import all the configuration, but here you import only the configuration that is in the split storage. And the individual export of a split does the same. It would do the same when you export all the configuration, but you can also just export what is in the split. So that's the basic things for how this works. And then the last really new mind-bending thing is that you can also have split as collections. Collection, you should be familiar with collections if you have worked with the multilingual Drupal 8 or Drupal 9. Collection is the folder in the export folder. So in the config export, you have like the languages folder and like one subfolder for all the individual languages. And in there, the configuration, like translations are kept. But these configuration collections are not unique to languages. They have just only been used for languages so far. And you will see why it's important later, but splits can now also be in collections. And this was like one of the earliest bugs of config split was someone trying to put the split folder inside of the config export folder. So, and then the two config storages, they get like messed up and they get inside of each other, and it was a big mess. So the solution for that issue was to not allow the split folder to be in the config sync folder, and like make a warning and like not allow that. And now you can do that, but not by selecting the config split folder to be in the sync folder, but you select that you want this to be a collection, and then you don't set any folder at all. The same if you have the split in the database. And that's another option that has been around for like the beginning of config split, but probably nobody used it because it was implied when you didn't set the folder. Now it's a bit more explicit. The advantage of this is that when you do a drush config export, you will see the difference also of the split, because the split is now part of the normal config sync directory. And I made a small example for this like terminal output copy paste, where I have my demo split, and then I just added the menu UI module to this demo split, and then I exported the configuration, and you see core extension gets updated because the menu UI gets removed. The node type recipe gets updated because it has a dependency on menu UI. The config split demo gets updated because I added menu UI. The menu UI settings are deleted because they depend on menu UI, and like it's a menu UI setting, so they get removed. And then you see the demo split collection, where the config split patch node type recipe gets created. And this is what I was talking about earlier. This config split patch contains the information on how the node type recipe changed when the split was created. And then you have menu UI settings that is created that's basically copied over from the other export. You can convince yourself that this works by basically doing this, and then instead of doing the just running the export, you preview the export, or you preview it, or you then view the result in Git. The other benefit of this is that the split is now part of the zip archive that you get when you export the configuration from the Drupal UI. I don't know if anybody does that and doesn't use drush, but you could, and you will later see why this is important for CMI2. There's, however, a caveat, which is that the config of inactive splits are still in the active configuration, just as a collection. So when you import the configuration, then when the split is active, so in this case, the demo split, it will merge the node type recipe with the patch. It will add the settings, the menu UI settings on the import, and it will remove the collection so that like this information is not necessary in the active storage because it's been applied. And when you export it again, it will export it again. However, when the split is inactive, then this configuration will be a collection, and config split will not do anything about it, so it will just remain as a collection in the active storage. This is important so that then later you can activate this split, and then it will activate it from the active storage. And so for splits where the collection is the storage is the collection, there the import and the activation is a little bit different, because the import takes it from the sync storage and the activation takes it from the active storage. But the configuration of the split of active splits is not in the active storage. So that should work, and it shouldn't be a problem that the configuration live alongside in the active storage, just in the collection. And in my limited examples that I tried, it also works. But like I haven't tried this on like complicated things, so it's still a bit experimental, this feature. I hope it will just work, and Drupal core doesn't mind that there is a config that is part of a collection. Otherwise, we will have to like prefix the names somehow or do something about it. But that's okay. We as config split, we own this collection and we can do whatever we want with it. So if we need to rename things or make sure that core doesn't get upset, then we will of course do that. Yeah. So the next thing that you need to be aware of is that splits are more independent of each other than in config split 1.x. Because we use these core services to determine how configuration needs to change when the dependencies are removed. Then the split will always split kind of what is active, and therefore, like you could theoretically also have two splits with the same module at the same time. And I see there is a typo there. Of course, the weights of the splits still matter. So you still have this weight element where you can basically decide the sorting order of the different splits. The sorting order is a bit different also in 1.x because the import and export observe different sorting orders. So in 1.x, because of the config filter didn't know whether you were exporting or importing, so it would just have all the filter plugins filtered in the same way all the time. But in 2.x, when you export the configuration, it could be ABC, and then when you import the configuration, it would be BCA. So the order is reversed. And because the splits and this configuration transformation API is using event subscribers, and because when you create an event subscriber, you cannot really dynamically do event subscribers based on the database, because the subscribed events are then put into the dependency injection container, and that happens before the database is available and before you can load splits. There is just one event subscriber for all the splits, but you can set up in settings.php, and there needs to be more documentation about this, but you can set in settings.php which splits should have what like weight in terms of the event subscriber weight, and then config split will add more event subscribers depending on what you set up in settings.php. So if you want some split to be before or after some other event subscribers for this configuration transformation API, like config ignore or the core one that excludes modules, or other modules, then you can do that. And I think it's a good compromise because you set it up in settings PHP and you know which splits you have, and you know which other modules you have, and you know what weights they should have. But it's a very advanced feature, and I haven't actually needed it myself. It was just more, I thought, like, to be compatible. I wanted to be as compatible as possible with the 1.x, and in 1.x you can do this, and so I tried to find a way in making this also possible in 2.x. So yeah, that's more or less the gist of it. Then in CMI2, you haven't heard much about CMI2, unfortunately, recently, but the big plan still exists. The big plan from February 2019, where we try to add support for environment-specific configuration, and you see on this issue, like half of the sub issues are already done, and they happened basically for Drupal 8.8. And this was this big configuration transformation API that we celebrated in Drupal 8.8. And now there is this new module that we want to add that does configuration specific for different environments. But it's not very easy to add things to core, and this module kind of like suffers from the problem that we don't know exactly what it should do and how it should do it, and like to add something to core that's not really battle tested in real life scenarios is very hard. And config split solves this problem, but also is used for many other use cases. I know people use config split for multi-site and other things, but this core environment module would just be for environment configuration. And with config split, it's like a sharp tool, but you can also hurt yourself with it more easily. And then if this would be straight in Drupal core, then all of the problems that people have with it would be core problems, and the people maintaining core understandably don't want this to happen. So they want the modules that are in core to be as stable as possible and as like complete as possible, and the scope of it should be very clear. And so we cannot just add config split to core. But what we can do, and what we did with the config split 2.x, is to add all the new features that this new core module would have to have, and try it out on real sites and check, like make sort of a proof of concept with config split 2.x for how this should work. And if you want to mimic the config environment with config split, then there's only basically 3 different things that you would do. You would only have one split active at a time. You would have, because this is the environment, you would use the collection as a split storage. That is because Drupal core only has the config sync storage, and Drupal core also supports configuration management with downloading a tarball and uploading it again. So, and the collection, as I said before, makes the split part of this tarball. Of course, this original idea of config split was to make a split so that if it's inactive, it doesn't interfere with the Drupal site. So it's like the safe option. But this can't work for Drupal core because all of the configuration should be part of this export and this tarball. Otherwise, you cannot move configuration across to a different environment with a zip file. Then you would have to have several zip files, and it would just be very complicated, and it would not work. And lastly, don't use the partial split feature, because that's not necessary for like environment-specific configuration necessarily. Or let's say maybe there is a use case for it, but it's not clear yet exactly how this would be necessary. And the initial module that we would add to Drupal core would be kind of limited in a way. Then, yeah, there are some difficulties. I found out. And so one of the biggest one is that config arrays are not sortable. And that means that when we merge the configuration patches back together, then we don't know how they should be merged. Because the order in config arrays matters for the import and export, because they create a diff in Git, and then you also see the diff in the import UI when it's not different. Then like you see like a line has been removed somewhere and added later, for example, and we don't want that, of course. And there are a couple of issues to make that happen, but yeah, there's some understandable reservations against that, because it means that when you export a configuration, everything changes because it will be sorted, and now it's sorted ad hoc. Every config entity can sort themselves the way they want, and normal config objects are just not sorted, and some of the things are really hard to sort, like the layout builder config, because it doesn't have weights, it's just the order is important, but there's no way of determining the order without it just being the one that is. So yeah, would have been too easy. There's maybe even more. We will find out when config split is used more. I invite you to try it out and report bugs and contribute patches and merge requests. Yeah. The roadmap for this, for config split 2 in core, so to say, or this config environment module, is to use config split 2, identify and fix all the bugs in config split so that it works. Then we need to assess what is kind of like a hack or a workaround for core issues, like the sorting that I just said. Right now, the workaround is just look at like the active configuration and see, okay, let's sort it the same way. It's a bit a workaround. It works mostly, but it's not like a proper engineered solution. Then we create a new simplified contrib module that we can test, and then include it in core. And finally, we celebrate that this has been achieved. That's it for the presentation. I'm not sure now that I didn't say something that is important and didn't mention it in the past. So I'll just go quickly back through the slides. Here, the status override is important because the environment-specific configuration, like which environment is active, would be saved in the state. Because when you take the dump from production and import it on your staging environment or on your local environment, then you take the whole production database, including the active configuration from the production database. And so you also need to include at the same time which environment was active at the time. And so since this state is also in the database, in configured environment, you would have in settings.php, this is my desired environment. And then after you import the dump of the configuration, you would know, okay, the configuration that's currently active doesn't match the environment that it should be in, and then you have like a UI like this to switch it. Then of course switching the UI, switching the environments would be the same as like activating and deactivating splits except you would do both at once. So you would deactivate one and activate the other at the same time. But the concept is still the same. You could probably also still use the same UI and preview the differences between the different config the same way. This I already mentioned why it's important. And so, yeah. And finally, there's contribution opportunities on the Open Social. And there's going to be, I was told, evaluation. So please also give some feedback there. Now I will try to go through what has been written in the chat. But I don't know how much time we still have for that. So yeah. Yeah, the split override in settings of PHP is probably going to be useful in a lot of different cases where you switch between different splits that are active at the time, and you don't want to change which is active and which is not, and you don't want to update settings.php as part of it. So the state override is so that you can you can program this in a nicer way, because then yeah, the configuration doesn't change, but also settings.php doesn't change. And yes, the text on the screenshot is very small, but you're not meant to read the text there. It's it's meant to serve as like this looks the same as the config import. You can, like, all of these, the screenshots were just taken from my demo Umami site with config split 2.x installed, and then I just like clicked import and saw the thing. There is a couple of bugs I already found with some things, but yeah, there is already a lot of contribution happening. So people were confused with the config patch. I mean, obviously here this image shows only what has been like removed from when it was exported, but it would just also add the things. But when you look at it the other way, it's a matter of perspective. Then you know, when you look at the configuration that's in your files, then it says removed for the purple edge, because it was removed when it was exported, but it will be added when it's imported. So, like, yeah, there's an issue for that. We can bike shed on what the name should be. And people liking the patches, I like it too. They kind of work, but like they suffer from this problem that config is not really sortable, and that when it uses the core array utilities, so it does just like an array diff, but array diffs are not very good when things are reshuffled. So when the same element is in position 1 and then in the other one is in position 2, then it will think that it has to remove both and add them in the other way around instead of, or yeah. So it's there's some room for improvement, and I don't know how much time we still have. I think 5 minutes. So I will see what else is there. Q&A. Yeah. The drush deploy command also works, or do I need anything special for config import? No, drush deploy command works the same way, because drush deploy uses drush config import, And drush config import does the import transformation, and therefore it will do the split transformations too. Is there any reason not to use the config split as a collection? Yeah, well, it's I tried to say it's part of the split that is then, if it's not active, is part of the active configuration. It shouldn't be a problem. So I would say no, there's no reason not to use it as a collection, if that's what you want to do. But there could be more bugs with the collections than with the files, because the files already existed for several years and they have been fine. And collections is like a new thing. And I don't know if the original authors of the config storages imagined a config storage that's inside of another config storage. There's also a limitation to collections. Like you cannot nest them, obviously. So if you look at the code and you're like, I want to reuse config split collections, you cannot nest them. So they will play nice with the config environment module. So that the config environment will have its own collections, the environment collections, and you will have like split and environment collections at the same time, and it should work. What would be an optimal workflow for distributing config maintenance and updates? Just the same way you do, like you export configuration and you import it again. For distribution, like that's a completely other topic. I'm not sure we have time to go into that. There's like good amount of people who struggle with this, and we descoped it from CMI2 because none of the people that work on distributions joined and spoke about it in the meetings. But now the distributions, they have their own sort of initiative, so it's fine. We can focus on environment-specific configuration. Module provided config being updatable. Yeah, that's the same problem with distributions. It's out of scope for config split. I recently had an issue where some configs were moved from sync to a new config split. As the new split is not yet created, those configs were first deleted. Yes, this should be fixed at the same time, but if you export all the configuration at the same time, this should not be a problem because the split... no, you're talking about importing when you move them into a split. Yes, actually, that's a thing that I forgot to mention. It's also a new feature. Splits are now immediately read. So when you have a split that is new, it will also be part of the first config import. So this is fixed. Thank you for mentioning this. I should have added it to the presentation. Pedro, yes, part of it will be in core. That's the plan. Not all of it, because config split allows lots of use cases, and I'm not sure people from core will be happy to just include it. But if so, then I'm happy to include all of it to core. Will translation collections be splittable? Not yet, but that's also a feature we could imagine, to like the selection of what is split and how to split only translation collections and not the rest. That's definitely a feature request we could consider. And finally, when is it going to be stable? I wanted to mark this release already as a release candidate, but there's still a lot of edge cases that need to be tested and more bugs to be found. So it's hard to say when the next release will be, like when the stable release will be. I would say for in the next half year, but it also depends on the adoption of the beta, because the more people that use the beta and the more people that don't have any issues with it, the more comfortable I am making a stable release. So like that's the basic the basic logic is if lots of people use it and nobody has any issues, then we can consider it stable. And I think that's it. Thank you. Or we can extend it more. Or I don't know, if there's no more questions, then thank you for your time. And thank you, Nicola, for mentioning that or asking about this new split issue that where config gets deleted. And no, this is also fixed in config split 2.x. It's a new feature I forgot to add to the slides, but thanks for mentioning that. And thanks for attending the session, and see you in the hallway track or otherwise around. Yeah, I hope then the next meeting will be in person again. It's been a bit weird to just talk to the screen, but yeah, see you around.